If you listened to part one of my interview with Texas A&M's Director of Emergency Management, Monica Martinez, you learned what emergency management looks like at one of the largest universities in the country. The sort of training and preparedness that a host of professionals undertake so a crisis or disaster is managed properly and efficiently for everyone on campus and even in the surrounding community. And if you didn't catch it, you can visit the Brazos Matters show page at kamu.tamu.edu. You can listen anytime. So today's part two will focus on the practical and important things that you and I can do to actually be prepared for emergencies, whether they strike while we're at home or at the workplace or even when we're out on the road. These are steps we can take that are pretty easy and affordable, not, building out a disaster bunker or something like that. Welcome to Brazos Matters. I'm Jay Sokol. And welcome back, Monica Martinez, Director of Emergency Management at Texas A&M.
Thanks, Jay. It's good to be back.
Yeah. So we hear a lot about having a disaster kit that's always ready to go, and I assume you have at least one of these. What's in it?
I have a first aid kit, of course. I have 3 days of food and water, not just for me, but also for my family and for my pets. Flashlights, batteries, super important. I have one of those little wind-up batteries, radios, so that you can listen to the radio, which is always important during emergencies and reliable. I have a flash drive with important documents, and I have a multi-tool, of course.
Okay, so let's stop there for just a second. You said 3 days worth of food and water. What does 3 days of food even look like? Like, what's in that?
This can honestly, it just kind of depends on you. We're looking at, bare minimum survival type things. For me, it's just making sure that I have enough stores in my pantry, right? That I don't let my pantry get to the point where it's bare bones and I don't have, some canned food, some cookies, whatever it is, right? Granola bars, things like that you can easily pull out and feed your family if you had to.
Shelf-stable stuff.
Shelf-stable stuff, yeah. We're not talking about having 3 days worth of gourmet meals available, right? Yeah. But those things that you kind of have in your pantry that if you had to in that disaster, pull from.
Okay. And you also said a flash drive with important documents. What do you consider important documents?
For me, that's going to be important contact information, medical records, vet records for your animals are always important if you have to go somewhere and evacuate with your animals, important contact information, insurance, things like that you might lose a physical copy of. Let's say you're hit by a tornado or something and your house is, a wreck, making sure that you have that digital copy somewhere as well.
Okay. So what else is in the disaster kit?
Cash is always important during disasters. You are, your debit cards and the electronic systems might not work. So making sure you have a cash available as well is critically important.
Do you recommend, I know this is subjective, but $50, $100, $200. I mean, what is considered enough to get by?
I think that's just really going to be dependent on what you can put aside. But I think any little bit is better than nothing.
Right.
So many people today don't have any cash on them at any time.
Right.
So, just having, $20, $100, whatever you can afford just to have that and just in case you need it.
Okay. What else?
Well, the other thing I was going to say, so many times people feel intimidated by creating a disaster kit, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I have to have all of these things. There's all of these lists that you can go out. If you go to ready.gov/kit, that has wonderful lists about the types of things that you should put in your disaster kit for your home. And then you should probably have one for your car and things. And people often feel overwhelmed by that. But honestly, the biggest thing is just starting that first step, right? I'm going to be at the grocery store today and I'm going to buy a few extra cans of, food, or I'm going to buy some granola bars to keep in my car. Little baby steps that you can take to slowly build your disaster kit over time is really going to how you're going to accomplish that. And so that's kind of the biggest message that I always say is that, you don't have to go to the grocery store or, Walmart or whatever and buy $500 worth of stuff to make this kit, right? Instead, kind of plan it out over time. All right, my goal for this next year is I'm going to buy, $10 worth of stuff every month for the next year. And by the end of the year, you have this pretty great disaster kit, right?
Yeah. So do you have some version of this in your car or at your workplace?
I do. Well, so my workplace, of course, is in a bomb shelter in downtown Bryan. So, in that regard, I'm always prepared at work. But for my car, yes, I do have a smaller version of this that includes, jumper cables and some cash in my car and, a little bit of food and water and a first aid kit and those kind of things.
Okay. All right. And so I'm mentally picturing, what these kits look like the one for your house. I mean, does that occupy a ton of space or no?
Well, again, for my house, it doesn't necessarily have to be a big giant tub full of stuff. For me, a lot of it resides in my pantry, right? Just making sure you have those items readily available within your home.
Okay. So whether you live alone or you have a multi-person household, I think you advocate having an emergency communication plan. What does that mean?
Yeah. So, one of the important things to remember in disasters is that communication can be really unreliable, right? And one of the biggest things that happens is everybody wants to know where their loved one is in this disaster, right? Is my loved one okay? Can I communicate to my loved one that I am okay, right? And so that's where having that emergency communication plan comes into play. Making sure that you have everyone's contact information saved somewhere other than just your phone. I know it's easy. We put them into our phone one day and we never look at the phone number again, right?
Right.
But, having those important phone numbers written down somewhere else, putting them on your Google Drive or that, flash drive that I mentioned earlier, or having it memorized. Do you have your mom's phone number memorized? I know, it's crazy. And so, making sure that you have at least one or two of those important phone numbers memorized so that if you do finally get access to a phone and you don't happen to have your cell phone, you can text somebody or you can call somebody and let them know that you're okay. But the other thing is just making sure, text message is usually the best way to communicate in a disaster because typically your phone lines are not going to work.
Yeah.
If you have internet connection for whatever reason, you might even be able to get a message out on Facebook or on social media or via email, but making sure that you've worked through this with your loved ones to say, hey, if something happens on campus, I'm going to reach out to you, or, you can reach out to me in this way, or this is, the group of people that I'm going to reach out with or reach out to, because when something happens, everybody's trying to call to make sure that their loved one is okay. And so that's where just making sure that you have that network of people that you're going to communicate with and that they are going to communicate with you during those disasters.
Yeah. So talk to me about the risks of depending too much on technology during a large-scale crisis, because it's hard enough to get your cell phone to work even when you're attending a football game. But when there are power outages, network disruptions, or damaged infrastructure, that could make things, as you were talking about, really tough. So what are some viable backup communication methods during times like that?
Well, smoke signals are really great.
Okay, I'm on it.
Yeah, so get on that for sure. Now, landlines, of course, are always that fallback, but how many people have landlines
Not
today?
a lot.
I don't even have a landline in my home, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, those were always the ways that people kind of relied on in the past, and that's not really something that we have access to now. So, again, I think making sure that you can find, either an internet access somewhere, reaching out via social media, email. A lot of times it's really not even about whether or not you can get communication out, that's important. But also, how are you receiving information is probably the more important thing. And that's where I think relying on radio, like good old-fashioned radio, because that's typically something that is not going to go down, and something that we are going to be able, from an emergency management standpoint, to be communicating with public media to get that important information out that you need to know in that disaster.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I've always loved radio, is because of its immediacy and almost no matter what's going on. But what are some other sources of essential and reliable information that people should sort of know about and have at the ready if something's happening?
Well, honestly, the biggest thing is to sign up to your local emergency management office's emergency alerts and warnings, right? So for on campus, that's going to be Code Maroon. that is the way that we are getting that critical life safety information out to you as quickly as possible. For the Health Science Center campus, that's going to be HSC Alert. For the Brazos County at large, whether you're in the city limits or in the county, that's going to be Code Red. And so all of our emergency management teams are plugged into these notification systems. And when something is happening, we're going to be able to get information out very quickly. For those of you who want to sign up for Code Maroon or HSC Alert, you can just go to codemaroon.tamu.edu and you'll see how you can sign up for those messages. And then for those in Brazos County who are interested in signing up for Code Red, you can go to brazosceoc.org/alerts, and you'll be able to sign up and register your cell phone number and your address there as well.
How do you decide what constitutes information that is, important enough to push out through Code Maroon? Like, at what point does it exceed a threshold?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we have, as I mentioned in our previous podcast, an emergency operations plan. We have, which is available online, we have an annex that talks about warning and when and why we send out Code Maroon messages. So if you've ever been interested in what are the criteria, what are the notification channels for Code Maroon? Because Code Maroon is not just a text message, right? It's an email. It's an app, or it's a push notification to the app. It is fire alarm panels that read out the message. It's digital signage. It's a website, all of those different things. And so, for us, it really looks at what is happening on campus and our duty to alert the campus community to a life safety situation. So what I'll tell you is that if there is a fire in your building, Code Maroon is not the way you're going to learn about that fire, right? There's going to be other life safety mechanisms in place, like the fire alarm and, the smoke detectors and all of that is going to alert you to the fire. However, if the fire is big enough and now we've got all of these first responders, coming to the scene to try to put out the fire, and now we're disrupting the campus and what's going on, then we might send out a Code Maroon to notify the campus community that, hey, this situation is happening and we'd like you to please avoid the area. So emergency notifications really are kind of a layered approach. Those individuals that are being affected by that disaster in real time are going to be notified probably by the other life safety mechanisms that we have built into our facilities. And it's only after we have, been notified of that emergency and we know that this is going to impact the rest of the campus, that's when we would be sending out a Code Maroon.
So one more thing about Code Maroon, just because I'm curious, how many people generally have to be involved in making the decision to say, yes, push it out? Because I'm guessing you're sort of the fingers behind the message that eventually goes out. But, how many people have to come together to make that decision?
So it really depends on the situation. And I know that's probably not the answer that everybody wants, right? You want it to be cut and dry. Every time it's going to be this criteria. But if it is a, critical life safety situation, we have an active threat on campus, active shooter, something like that we know is happening, a tornado warning where, time is of the essence. Then we have a very short chain of command to make that decision. And it really is the police officer in charge and the university dispatch communicator who can push that message out, without any questions. They have the authority to do that. If it's a situation that, let's say there's a gas leak and it's small and it's contained and we don't know if it's going to affect the broader campus or not, or if it's going to have other implications. Well, maybe we have time, it's under control. The fire department is there and utilities is there. Then we have a little bit more time to send that message up the chain and decide, okay, is this big enough for us to send out a Code Maroon, or is it something that's isolated and going to be handled and it's not going to have an impact to campus? Therefore, we don't need to send something out. So it really just depends on the situation.
If you just tuned in, I'm Jay Sokol. You're listening to Brazos Matters, and my guest is Monica Martinez, Director of Emergency Management for Texas A&M University. And we're talking about what you and I could do to help keep ourselves prepared and safe when an emergency or a disaster occurs. So during some emergency response scenarios that we've encountered here, it seems like there are more and more real plans in place for people with pets or other animals that require being moved from a location that's in potential jeopardy, to a well-equipped and well-staffed place of safety. So whether we're talking about my 14-year-old Super Beagle tiger or someone's horse, like what plans should we have in place ahead of time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing is to always have copies of your vet records with you, because you never know, if you do have to evacuate for some reason and you do show up at a shelter, they're going to need to know what those vet records are. So make sure that you have all appropriate documentation for your pets is probably the biggest thing. Next, just like with that disaster kit that I was talking about earlier, making sure that you have enough food, water for your pets, leashes, harnesses, kennels if you have them, if you are evacuating, any type of medications that they might need, etc. Because again, you don't know exactly what the requirements of that shelter is going to be. One thing from an emergency management standpoint that we have learned, especially when we're talking about coastal evacuations during hurricanes and other severe weather, is that people will not evacuate without their pets, right? And so we, from an emergency management standpoint, have to plan to accommodate that in some way. And so we're working very hard with our animal shelters and others to have those plans in place. But we are going to be relying on you, the pet owner, to come with as many things to support your animal as possible, like their food, like their medications, kennels if you have them, and also be prepared when you arrive at the shelter to be the primary caretaker of your pet. So, you might arrive at a shelter. Sometimes they're co-located shelters, but oftentimes, your pet might be in a different location, and you're going to have to go to that location twice a day to let out your animal or to care for them or things like that. So those are things that you need to consider as well as you're looking on your evacuation path if you have to and for these shelters. For our large animals, I will say that many times our large animal community is very prepared, on what to do. They're very used to traveling, especially if they're like horse shows or livestock shows or things like that. But again, it's making sure that you have a reliable means of transportation for your animal, that you call ahead to, the county extension office or to local emergency management to see if there's any large animal shelters going on or open. For us, typically the Brazos Expo Center has opened their doors to the large animal community for people who are seeking shelter, especially from our coastal hurricanes and things like that. But again, just, making sure that you have those plans in place ahead of time so that you're not scrambling at the time of the disaster to try to figure out where you might be going.
Is it naive for me to think that our community is probably much better suited and prepared for that sort of thing than most communities, simply because we've got Texas A&M and all of its resources, and I don't know, it just feels like we may be in better shape in that regard than a whole lot of other places.
I will say that we are very, very blessed as a community to have the resources available to us that we do, between our partnership with the animal hospital, with our local, there's a animal welfare committee that Brazos County Emergency Management kind of coordinates to plan for, our animal population during evacuations and things like that. We have the Expo Center, which is, a beautifully equipped facility for our large animals that are coming in. And so we are very, very fortunate as a community to have access to all of these resources. But again, it's not just having the access. It goes back to our first session together where it comes to that planning and that coordination and those relationships that we build with all of those organizations to be able to pull from them during those disasters.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, you have young kiddos, right?
I do.
So have you actually practiced any kind of emergency drills with them to make sure they know what to do?
Yes. Again, being the emergency preparedness mom, that's part of what we do. And, so many times people think that these conversations have to be formalized or, even, when we're talking about this at work or, at home, that we have to have like this formal process or plan for this. But a lot of it is just talking about it with your kids or with your family or with your coworkers. Hey, if something were to happen, this is how we evacuate, the house, or this is our meeting place outside. Or if something happens to mom, this is how you pick up the phone and call 911, especially important with our small children. Because now, that we don't have landlines, that's not really something that kids learn, right? Pick up the phone, call 911 in an emergency. For me, I've tried to also tell my kids, if something happens to, me, run outside to the neighbor, right? Knock on the door, get an adult to come and help if something happens or whatever, and you can't get my phone or you can't call 911. So a lot of it is really just having those conversations on a regular basis. You're sitting around the dinner table and it's like, hey, if something were to happen, this is our evacuation route or this is what we do. And just kind of building that in because our kids are listening. That's why we have all of these programs in elementary school, stop, drop, and roll, and, the fire departments visit or they come home with this health information. They want us to be safe. So capitalize on that and that culture preparedness that you can build in with your children.
Are you seeing any signs that you are raising kids who are emergency preparedness nerds?
I don't know if they're nerds, but I definitely would say that they pay attention to the emergencies that are happening, mostly because they know when there's an emergency happening, mom's going to be probably busy handling it. I can tell you that there have been times during tornado warnings where I have been in my safe shelter in the pantry with my toddler and my, preteen and my husband and my dog and my laptop trying to monitor the weather and send out the next code maroon. So
you must have a heck of a pantry.
It is a pretty big pantry. We're very fortunate. Yeah.
Well, I just have to think that your kids are having conversations with their friends about, do you know what to do in cases of such and such? And their friends are like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, for sure.
That's who they are. So I live in a pretty traditional neighborhood, and I have, a decent amount of square footage to work with. What are reasonable things that students, especially the ones who live in dorms on campus, should do in terms of preparedness? Because I would think most are kind of unfamiliar with places and roadways and resources and that sort of thing, and would kind of rely almost entirely on the university to tell them what to do. So in terms of space limitation and them knowing what to do, what does that look like for you in your office?
Yeah. So, I think for students, again, building a disaster kit can kind of seem overwhelming, right? What all do I need? But honestly, so many of them probably already have elements of this in the backpack that they carry around every day, right? Make sure you have some granola bars. Make sure you have a bottle, either empty or whatever, that you can refill with water. Make sure that you have a little mini first aid kit, right? Make sure you have kind of those important things that you need, a cell phone charger or something like that, right? That's the start of a disaster kit, right? It doesn't have to be this big, complicated thing. You can build little pieces over time based on, what it is that you need. And so that's kind of the biggest thing for me. The other thing is just making sure to pay attention to your surroundings, right? What is going on around me? Is the weather going to get bad this week?
Yeah.
Should I have that umbrella? Again, building that culture of preparedness. And then also just, again, paying attention to the emergency notification and information that's coming out from the university, because we will tell you what to do. We will say, hey, this is a safe location, or this is where you need to go to seek safe shelter, or things like that. And so making sure that you are plugged into the way that the university communicates with you in disasters, and that's going to be Code Maroon.
Is there any kind of effort to connect with families of students, especially new students, to advise them like, hey, it'd be great if you helped your students, send them to school with this basic preparedness kit, or have these conversations with? Is there any effort from the university to try to have that connection with families ahead of time?
So we do have some videos that play during new student conferences that everybody gets to see. We do talk to families during new student conferences about downloading Code Maroon or registering for Code Maroon. Families can download the Code Maroon app. So for parents who are interested in receiving those messages so that they know what's going on campus, that's a free option for them to be able to receive those messages as well. And then we do have education outreach booth during our new student conferences to try to connect. We have something called the 12th Man Emergency Playbook that has information about what to do in different types of emergencies. It's available online. The information is also in the Code Maroon app, or people can stop by our table during new student conferences and pick up the 12th Man Emergency Playbook if they're interested in learning more.
What kind of things are in that playbook?
What to do when you get a code maroon. If there's an active shooter, it talks about what to do in that situation, what to do in a tornado warning, what to do in different types of medical emergencies. So kind of those emergency procedures that everybody should be familiar with.
Okay. So you and I have talked in a previous episode, right, part 1, about everything that you do and your office does and how that fits into the campus and broader community. And then today we've been talking more about what we can do as individuals and as families to be as prepared as possible for something. What else is on your list with the last couple of minutes we have here? What else did maybe we not touch on that you want to make sure folks know?
So one thing that we didn't talk on specifically was severe weather, because I think that's something that can impact us all the time. And we just had that storm over the weekend. And thankfully there were no tornadoes, but we still had some pretty strong winds and severe weather coming through. And so I think just from a preparedness standpoint, making sure that you're paying attention to your favorite weather app or your favorite meteorologist, and just being aware of these types of situations that might come in, especially in the spring. We have a lot of severe weather that pops up, but now June 1st was the start of hurricane season. For us, typically the peak of that isn't until, late August and early September, right at the start of the school year. But just making sure that you're tuned in to severe weather, because it is something that seems to be impacting us a lot more than, maybe it did 15, 20 years ago that I remember. And so just making sure that you're plugged into your favorite severe weather notifications as well.
Is there a specific weather-related app that you particularly gravitate towards?
So we have a paid subscription service to severe weather, because a lot of times I have to monitor lightning in the area.
Oh, yeah.
So, we use something with that for the emergency management team. So I don't know that I have any specific app, but there's so many great apps out there. Many of them are pulling from the National Weather Service information, and that's always a trusted source as well.
Okay. Tell us how to learn more about what your office does and what A&M does in terms of emergency preparedness, and how to follow you sort of day to day.
So you can go to www.tamu.edu/emergency. That's going to talk about the emergency management program and our team. If you're interested in fun and quirky information about emergency preparedness, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at TAMU Prepares. And then, of course, for that emergency notification component, making sure that you are signed up to receive text messages from Code Maroon at codemaroon.tamu.edu.
That sounds pretty good.
Right.
Monica Martinez, thank you so much for this talk.
Thank you.
Brazos Matters is a production of Aggie Lines Public Radio, 90.9 KAMU FM, a member of Texas A&M University's Division of Marketing and Communications. Check us out at kamu.tamu.edu/radio.